Here we have Carol Bartz. Bart was appointed as the CEO of Yahoo back in January 2009, a time where the once internet giant was experiencing tremendous challenges. From being hired on a 4-year contract, Bartz was fired through a phone call just 2 years and 8 months after joining the company. Unfortunately, Bartz's experience is not a singular, unique case. Her successor, Marisa Mayer, was also fired after years of heavy scrutiny amidst a declining Yahoo. There's also Jill Abramson, the first female chief editor of the New York Times, who was fired for introducing strategic interventions to combat the company's declining revenues. There are also some female leadership success stories despite all the challenges they faced upon their ascension. Mary Barra was appointed as CEO of General Motors during an ongoing scandal over the recall of 1.6 million cars, while Anne Mulcahy was able to turn things around at Xerox when she took over as CEO while the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Outside the realm of business, women still experience significant challenges. Margaret Thatcher experienced a series of crises throughout her career in UK politics. Much closer to home, we have Renho Saito, tipped as the future Prime Minister of Japan and appointed as the leader of the politically struggling Democratic Party of Japan. Renho stepped down as the party leader in 2017 after the party's poor performance in the Tokyo Metropolitan Assembly elections. Evidently, there are opportunities available for women to take on executive leadership positions, but we can't help but wonder, why are they usually appointed when the company is experiencing crucial challenges? And worse, are they being forced to leave the company because of these challenging circumstances? Good day, everyone. I'm Richie Grapelon, and together with Julia Martinez and Sarah Venegas, let us explore the experiences of women leading on the edge. A study on the glass cliff in the COVID-19 pandemic and its relationship with turnover intention as mediated by well-being and job satisfaction. Much effort has been exerted in curbing gender bias, yet it still remains highly prevalent in the workplace despite the growing awareness and demand for gender equality. One reason for this is that gender bias has become much subtler over the years, creating workplace barriers that hinder the career growth of women. For example, we have the glass ceiling, which restrains women from ascending to top management positions. And we have the glass escalator, where men experience unwarranted advantages in predominantly female professions. The most recent and arguably the most subtle challenge to emerge for women is the glass cliff, defined as women being more likely than men to be appointed to leadership positions during precarious situations, usually in times of crisis and instability, which may contribute to the inverse relationship of the number of female leaders and the seniority of a position, meaning the higher you go up the career ladder, the fewer women leaders you find. In the Philippines, however, gender inequality is a bit more complicated. We are considered a global leader when it comes to women leadership representation. Yet further observations show the decline of women leaders as they go up the career ladder. Since the onset of the pandemic, more and more women have decided to leave the workforce despite their high-ranking positions and the flexibility offered by the work-from-home setup. While local causes have yet to be identified, global reports show that poorer overall well-being, heightened workplace burnout, and intense pressures are some of the reasons for the turnover of women leaders. With the pandemic worsening the effects of the glass cliff phenomenon, we identify a growing need to explore and describe the glass cliff experiences of women leaders in the Philippines. Specifically, we seek to understand how the presence of perceived glass cliff affects the turnover intention of women leaders at the time of the pandemic. Supporting these are two objectives: to understand how the glass cliff contributes to the turnover intention, and to understand the relationship between perceived glass cliff, well-being, and job satisfaction of Filipino women leaders. But before delving deeper into our study, let us first learn more about the glass cliff phenomenon. The glass cliff is a relatively new phenomenon coined by Michelle Ryan and Alex Haslam in 2005. They define it as women being preferentially placed in leadership roles that are associated with an increased risk of negative consequences. In a later study, they claim that women are usually appointed to glass cliff roles by male leaders to save the organization in crisis, or to let women take the blame if the situation worsens. In the development of the gender bias scale for women leaders, glass cliff is classified as a lower order factor of male privilege and defined as placing a woman in a high risk role with a likelihood of failure. A sample situation cited is women being held responsible for organizational problems outside of their control. Now that we have defined the glass cliff, you may be wondering, how did this phenomenon came to be? Literature has identified five underlying mechanisms that led to the existence of the glass cliff. First is, of course, socially prevalent gender stereotypes that associate certain leadership characteristics as stereotypically female, or what we call soft skills or people skills. There are also communal traits such as being empathic, understanding, and cooperative that are frequently associated with female leaders. These stereotypes have led to the mindset of think crisis, think female, because apparently these traits make women much more suitable to handle crisis situations. Second are personal biases and sexism. As mentioned earlier, men are usually the ones appointing women to precarious roles. This practice is known as in-group bias due to the preferential treatment given by these male leaders to protect their fellow men from failure. Even worse, the appointment of a woman to a senior role appears like a gender-equitable practice for these male leaders. However, since they are setting up women to fail, or at least using them as scapegoats, their actions are not considered gender fair, but rather a form of ambivalent sexism. Third, studies show that in threatening situations, there is a preference for change over stability, and the appointment of women leaders signals strategic organizational changes. However, this change may not be entirely genuine, but rather a deliberate scheme to appease stakeholders and the media. Appointment of women leaders may also be a desperate last resort after exhausting all possible means to address a crisis. Fourth, the glass cliff is also influenced by the availability of social support from relevant stakeholders such as senior leaders, or in this case, the lack thereof. Women leaders receive little to no support from their superiors, regardless of their gender, because of the people skills they supposedly possess that make these women fully capable of gathering the financial and social resources they need to address a crisis. Finally, the glass cliff may be a result of women's personal choices. Despite the associated risks and challenges, women leaders see glass cliff roles as opportunities for career advancement that are otherwise unavailable to them under normal circumstances. It can also go the other way. Women decline glass cliff roles or leave the organization altogether, contributing to the scarcity of women leaders in senior positions. After gaining a deeper understanding of the glass cliff, let's now look into the other variables in this study.
The other variables in this study are well-being, which is broken down further into two components based on Dr. Martin Seligman's PERMA theory of well-being, particularly engagement and social support. This is followed by job satisfaction and turnover intention, which are defined as follows on the screen. Previous literature have shown interactions of gender-related factors with each of these variables, but rarely have they been studied altogether. Now, we look to the current research gaps that signal a niche appropriate for this research, which is grounded on the theoretical frameworks of Cantor, as well as that of Eagly and Carrao. First, much of archival research has found divided support for the glass cliff. There is a lack of studies that present determinants of the glass cliff. It's also observed how much of these studies that do show support for the glass cliff are mixed method studies, yet these are also rare in occurrence. Researchers have been encouraged to integrate more interactors and country-specific variables due to their substantial impact in explicating Glasscliff appointments. Finally, while the Philippines ranks first globally in women leadership representation, a statistic that is on a steady incline since 2015, there's actually a decline of women leaders as they go up the career ladder. Despite active participation in COVID-19 related efforts, women were also excluded from national decision making and strategic planning. Given these realities, we find the need to delve deeper into Glasscliff studies in the Philippine context. Understanding the relationship between the perceived Glasscliff and Filipino women leaders' turnover intention in the context of the pandemic paves way for the development of management research. Having a clearer, more textured picture of how perceived Glasscliff impacts women leaders, especially their turnover intent, can help managers and business institutions prepare for or even prevent the Glasscliff's harrowing effects. Anchored in the RVRV COB Code of Ethics and the Covenant of Shared Prosperity, this study promotes a more humane and enabling work community by highlighting potentially harmful behaviors, biases, and beliefs in an organization related to gender. Doing research that highlights these negative or unethical practices promotes work environments that recognize the efforts of its employees fairly, irrespective of their gender. We also want to work towards sustainable development goals that promote gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. Through the encouragement of sustainable and inclusive economic development with decent work for all, and of course the promotion of peace and inclusivity in societies through just institutions by keeping in check businesses and their practices.
We have the conceptualization of the turnover intent of women leaders relative to their well-being and job satisfaction in Glasscliff situations. The conceptual framework for this study is modeled after Igley's extended role congruity theory and Cantor's tokenism theory. Under the role congruity theory, the Glasscliff represents the gender biases held against women, which create a mental incongruity whenever they are put into leadership positions that are stereotypically ascribed to men. With the widely prevalent Think Crisis, Think Female association, gender biases against female leaders may be much more prominent in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, under the tokenism theory, the lack of representation in executive or leadership positions makes women leaders more prone to negative workplace experiences. Women leaders also tend to be more visible due to their small numbers, exposing them to higher chances of performance pressure and scrutiny, consequently negatively impacting their job satisfaction and well-being, and increasing the risk of or for attrition. Glass and Cook of 2015 claim that the two theories are suggestive of women placed in a Glasscliff environment, experiencing a lack of support and resistance to their authority due to the combination of underrepresentation of female leadership and biased perceptions of their eligibility for the position. Now that we have clarified the base theories for our conceptual framework, let's try to take it down piece by piece to understand how the variables of interest are expected to interact with one another. We begin with perceived Glasscliff as the sole independent variable. This and all other variables and relationships are examined in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Philippines. Perceived Glasscliff, along with workplace gender bias as a whole, has been linked as a significant barrier that prevents women from achieving leadership positions, often branding them as less capable and competent leaders, despite contrary evidence, while raising men on higher pedestals in organizations. As such, studies show an association between women's withdrawal from organizational decision-making and disengagement from their responsibilities due to stereotypes and biases attached to their gender. As women are perceived to be more communal, they are seen as more able to capture social support in times of difficulty. Previous scholars have also drawn associations between gender inequity and turnover intent, as women in token status may have increased desires to leave their workplace due to heightened scrutiny, lower pay, and the need to work harder than their male counterparts. With this, we have our first set of hypotheses pertaining to the impacts of perceived glass cliff to other variables. For H11 and 2, perceived glass cliff will influence engagement and social support as a component of well-being, respectively. H13 and 4, perceived glass cliff will influence job satisfaction and turnover intention, respectively. Now that we have discussed the first half of the conceptual framework, we move on to the mediation relationships of perceived glass cliff to turnover intent. Stereotype threat serves as a source of job disengagement, lower job satisfaction, and other related negative job attitudes, which then are associated with increased intentions to resign and retire. On the other hand, the lack of support in the context of women as tokens negatively relates to job satisfaction, and job satisfaction has been seen as a negative predictor of turnover intention. Satisfied employees are more likely to stay in their organizations and decrease their intention to quit a job. As such, the second set of hypotheses are as follows. For H21 and 2, perceived glass cliff mediated by engagement and social support as components of well-being will influence turnover intention respectively. For H23, perceived glass cliff mediated by job satisfaction will influence turnover intention. After wrapping up the conceptual framework, we move on to the methodology of the paper. A mixed method approach with an explanatory sequential design was used in this study. This particular research design has been chosen given the availability and psychometric soundness of the quantitative instruments used, plus the merit of exploring further details and explanations surrounding the glass cliff phenomenon. Glass cliff is a relatively new phenomenon, yet to be deeply explored. Assessing the impact of the antecedents on the turnover intention is best understood through rigorous quantitative methods. Other scholars also note that a mixed method approach is best suited for quote-unquote real-life contextual understandings, multi-level perspectives, and cultural influences. The quantitative survey is used as a tool to gather interested interview participants for the qualitative part of the study through a mix of case selection and follow-up explanation variants. Case selection allows the researchers to gain multi-level perspectives from participants in different industries, functions, and positions. For the participants and sampling design of the study, the research employed non-probability sampling, particularly through a combination of purposive sampling, convenience sampling, and snowball sampling targeting women in a project or team leadership positions working from any company based in the Philippines. Participants gathered were restricted to those with around 1 year or at least 11 months of work experience with their current position. A total of 84 respondents were gathered for the study, 3 of whom were interviewed. 84 is the minimum sample size for this study as determined by an a priori sample size calculator. A total of 4 scales were used in the online survey, 1 for each variable. The glass cliff questions are part of a subscale of the gender bias scale for women leaders by Deal et al. Under the higher order factor of male privilege. There are a total of 3 questions with a 5-point scale, starting from 1 as strongly disagree to 5 as strongly agree. The measure for well-being was adopted from the workplace PERMA profiler, a variant of the PERMA profiler from the PERMA theory of well-being. The subscales for engagement and relationships were used, each having 3 items with a 10-point Likert scale, agreement scale. Job satisfaction was measured using the generic job satisfaction scale developed by MacDonald and McIntyre back in 1997. The instrument has a total of 10 questions, each having a 5-point Likert scale. For turnover intent, a 3-item turnover intent scale adopted from Mobley et al. The scale features 3 items with a 5-point Likert agreement scale. A semi-structured interview questionnaire was also used to gather qualitative information from the participants. Such an approach allowed the researchers to ask follow-up questions depending on the context and experience of each participant that better capture the glass cliff phenomenon unique for each individual, position, function, or industry. The formulation of the structured questions employed a top-down approach wherein each interview question is grounded on the research questions of the study. The data collection procedure of this study is composed of 2 distinct phases. First, the quantitative survey-based portion, and the qualitative interview-based portion. First, the study was distributed to 84 Filipino women who have had at least 1 year of work experience. They were contacted via social media networks, primarily through LinkedIn and Facebook. Each willing respondent answered the survey via Tripeto Studio. The results of the survey were then exported from Tripeto and uploaded to Google Suite. In addition, the exported data was regressed via Jamovie in order to quantitatively represent the relationship between the variables of interest. After the quantitative data collection phase, the analyzed survey results were used to screen respondents for interview participation. Among those willing to engage in the interview, the researchers chose 3 interviewees who had the most interesting survey results. In this case, interesting results were defined as either outlier among the surveyed individuals and/or survey answers that were deemed to warrant additional context by the researchers. Each interview was held online via Zoom, and the recording was uploaded to Google Sheet. From the interviews, the researchers took notes of anecdotes and answers that provided additional information or contextualized the answers of the interviewers to the survey. With all these said and done, we move on to the results and analysis of the study. This study surveyed 84 respondents, the descriptive statistics for which are shown in the table on the left. The average tenure of respondents was around 5 years, but the median and the model tenure period were only 2 years. This implies that the majority of respondents are relatively new to the workforce. On the other hand, the size of the team members being handled has an average value of around 68 people. However, the median value for team members being handled was only 5 people and the model value was only 2 people. This implies that in terms of the number of team members, the data gathered is significantly skewed toward one direction. In comparison to the expected values mentioned in the methodology, the convex alpha of all variables are at an acceptable level, with the exception of engagement. In particular, the value of alpha is 0.693 for engagement, which is significantly less than the expected value of 0.85. It is notable that this expected value was taken from Japanese participants who may not react or value engagement in the same manner as Filipino individuals. Aside from this, the value of alpha is 0.693 for engagement is close to the rule of thumb, or 0.7, which indicates that possibility for the use of the variable is still present. In addition, it is important to note that excluding other portions of the components of the engagement variable resulted in lower values of convex alpha. All in all, the values of convex alpha for all variables are acceptable, but the results for engagement may have relatively weak reliability. The topmost table indicates the summarized results for the linear regression of the variables of interest. Of note is the relatively low adjusted R2 for the model at 29.7%. This implies that the current model only explains around 30% of the variability in turnover intention. While the adjusted R2 is relatively low, the model still has explanatory power in terms of examining the factors that affect turnover intention. Among the variables of interest, only perceived glass cliff, represented as the letter G in the first column of the bottom table, and job satisfaction, or J, are statistically significant independent variables. The results suggest that higher levels of perceived glass cliff will vary directly with turnover intention, which is in line with expectations. In addition, higher levels of job satisfaction will decrease turnover intention. On the other hand, neither engagement E nor social support S has a statistically significant effect on turnover intention. While the lack of statistical significance of well-being in the model goes against previous research, the relationship between well-being and turnover intention may not be captured fully by a strictly linear model. Unexpectedly, the results suggest that higher levels of engagement and social support will vary directly with turnover intention. Intuitively, this seems contradictory, but it should be noted that this relationship is questionable due to the relatively weak explanatory power of engagement and social support on turnover intention. As for the mediation analysis, no mediation effects were present across the model. As seen in the top 3 or indirect rows of this table, neither well-being nor job satisfaction was representative of a mediating effect on turnover intention. To better understand these results, it is relevant to discuss the component effects seen in the second portion of the table. The partial effect of engagement, social support, and job satisfaction on turnover intention varies in both significance and magnitude. Both engagement and social support directly affected turnover intention. Engagement directly affects turnover intention, but not in a statistically significant manner. On the other hand, social support directly affects turnover intention, but in a statistically significant manner. This implies that the more social support experienced by the individual, the higher their turnover intent. These results seem counterintuitive based on previous research and established theories, but qualitative analysis may better explain the underlying relationship between these variables. For instance, qualitative results may potentially explain the indirect link between social support and turnover intentions, as some respondents reported that social support, particularly intervention from their supervisors, is preferred to be minimal. Although this relationship is statistically significant in the case of mediation analysis, the clashing results with the linear regression model suggest that this relationship may be inconclusive and subject to further study. Lastly, job satisfaction directly affects turnover intention. As expected, women with higher levels of job satisfaction had lower levels of turnover intention. If the job currently held is satisfying, then it is unlikely for the respondent to intend to leave. Finally, the direct effect of the perceived glass cliff on turnover intention is analyzed. From this table, it is clear that the perceived glass cliff directly affects turnover intention. In line with expectations, women who perceived a significant glass cliff situation or situations were more likely to intend to engage in employee turnover. In other words, women who expect no significant progress in their role in the company are less likely to continue working in that role. Taking all the indirect and direct effects of the key independent variables on turnover intention, this table suggests that for each unit increase in perceived glass cliff, turnover intention increases by 0.32 units. Phrased differently, an individual that definitely perceives a glass cliff situation will exhibit a 32% increase in turnover intent, in comparison to a person who perceives no glass cliff at all. It is important to note that the total effect of the glass cliff on turnover intention is lower than the direct effect of the glass cliff or perceived glass cliff on turnover intention because of the negative impact of job satisfaction on turnover intent. Both analysis methods yield similar results. Perceived glass cliff directly affects turnover intention. These results are in line with the expectations established in the theoretical framework. Indeed, gender inequity does lead to turnover intention, at least in the case of Filipino women. In addition, it is also significant to note that job satisfaction indirectly affects turnover intention across both methods. These results are within expectations, in line with previous studies on the relationship between job satisfaction and turnover intent. Lastly, both results suggest that well-being affects turnover intention directly, but in a weak manner. These results are not in line with expectations. However, due to the weak relationship between well-being and turnover intent, it can be said that the relationship between the said variables is inconclusive. Qualitative analysis suggests that respondents prefer minimal social support, which may explain the observed relationship between social support and turnover intent. Perhaps a larger sample size may reflect the expected relationship between engagement and social support with turnover intentions.
As mentioned previously, the quantitative survey was used to identify interviewees for the qualitative part of our study. We were able to converse with 3 women leaders from diverse backgrounds who were assigned pseudonyms due to the delicate nature of this research. We have Anna, a marketing coordinator from a renowned educational institution in the Philippines. Bea, a communications manager of a Japanese beverage company with operations in the Philippines, and Cass, an account executive for a global healthcare company. Using thematic analysis, qualitative data from the interviews were organized based on their frequency, meaning how often they were mentioned by the participants, or their magnitude, referring to the significance of the participants, resulting in 3 main themes: Glasscliff experiences, workplace well-being indicators, and job satisfaction determinants. From the 6 interviewees, 6 unique Glasscliff experiences were identified. A lot of survey respondents experienced job enlargement or being assigned to additional, challenging, and unrelated work since the onset of the pandemic. For Anna, in particular, she was assigned to do live streams despite not being part of her job description as a graphic artist. Bea experienced the same thing, where she was tasked to do recruitment despite not having any talent acquisition or HR background. Female leaders also had to deal with increased time and performance pressure usually associated with the additional role or task given to them. Anna's appointment to a difficult and unrelated role increased the pressure to deliver because she was well aware of the dire consequences for the company when the project goals are not accomplished. Survey respondents and interviewees alike cited the lack of access to career advancement opportunities as a contributor to the glass cliff. This lack of access also limits the availability of women leaders who can serve as role models for career progression. Bea also cited the lack of networking opportunities as another factor, sharing that women do not have much access to activities that would allow them to expand and forge connections with key individuals who can refer, coach, or mentor them. Socially prevalent gender biases also affect the Glasscliff experiences of women leaders, where their competencies are judged based on their gender and gendered beliefs hold them back from entering certain functions or industries. Finally, self-agency was a recurring notion among the 3 interviewees, where they believed that women being in Glasscliff situations is a product of their own choices and actions. For Anna, she chooses to find ways to work around the glass cliff because she believes that wherever she goes, the glass cliff will always be present. Bea, on the other hand, sees glass cliff as a challenge to overcome, while Cass highlighted the desire to balance personal and professional responsibilities. Despite the challenges they encounter, women leaders still find joy and excitement in their work. One of the reasons for this is because of the people these women interact with and the quality of relationships they have with their colleagues. Another is the flexibility and freedom granted to them by their immediate superiors. Being allowed to do their work as they see fit and not being micromanaged make Bea and Cass feel empowered and trusted in their roles. The flexibility also allows Anna to pursue her interests and do freelance work. However, it is still important for the interviewees to feel supported by their senior leaders, whether directly or indirectly. In terms of job satisfaction, all three interviewees reported that they find their role and their work meaningful despite the occurrence of glass cliff. Support and career growth is another contributor to job satisfaction, especially for a fresh graduate like Cass, because it shows that the company cares about its employees. Respect and appreciation also goes a long way, and Anna felt that having the job title of a leader has earned her more respect from her colleagues. Unfortunately, she still feels underappreciated by her teammates, but both her and Cass have immediate superiors who appreciate them and the work that they do. Work interest alignment is also a contributing factor for Anna, being in the creatives field and eventually venturing into marketing, where she is able to pursue her newfound interest in public speaking. However, the main driver of job satisfaction, at least for our three interviewees, is still compensation and benefits. They would much rather receive additional pay or bonuses to compensate for the additional responsibilities assigned to them. Outside these three main themes, we have also discovered experiences that are unique to each interviewee. First is the impact of generational gap. Age and tenure may have compounded the negative glass cliff experiences of Anna. Being the youngest employee on her team in terms of age and tenure, she was made the go-to person for all technological and digital needs despite not being part of her job description. Second is having prior experiences in high-pressure environments like Bea, who is a former athlete. The rigorous training and strict discipline needed by athletes made it much easier for her to adapt and thrive in high-pressure situations. Finally, Cass credited the diversity, equity, and inclusion or DEI initiatives in their company as to why she is experiencing low to non-existent glass cliff. Such initiatives include emphasize gender diversity in the company credo and women-centered celebrations such as Women's Month and Mother's Day. To place our results into context, let us go back to what we know about the glass cliff and the objectives of this study.
Beginning with our confirmatory findings, our discoveries regarding glass cliff and its mechanisms are aligned with literature. Both the quantitative and qualitative results of the study affirm the different mechanisms of the glass cliff. The Think Crisis, Think Female association was experienced by respondents through job enlargement, increased pressure, and pre-existing gender biases. Because of their perceived competencies as well as expected gender roles, women were provided with high-risk tasks. These competencies include the communal traits and soft skills expected in women. Moreover, the Think Male, Think Manager Association was also reflected in the results as the respondents experienced a lack of career advancement opportunities as well as networking opportunities given that the culture in their workplace discourages women from participating in senior leadership positions, while the opposite is expected of men. Aside from the expected norm of focusing on housework, women in the workplace face difficulties in relating or participating in networking activities that seem unfamiliar to them. It was also in the results that there are women who are willing to accept high-risk challenges, such as those that accompany glass cliff, so long as the compensation and benefits are deemed appropriate or substantial. The link between glass cliff and well-being was also noticed. In the literature review, gender-related factors, including those that interact along with glass cliff, have been seen to interact with engagement and social support. It was found through the quantitative analysis that both engagement and social support are directly affected by the glass cliff. However, the results suggest that the more perceived glass cliff is experienced by a woman, the more engaged and prevalent their social support becomes. While the relationship's significance is confirmatory, the direction of the relationship prompts further studies. As said, some interesting points from the qualitative analysis may assist in understanding this relationship. In particular, the interviewees are able to perform well and happily in their jobs with the help of other colleague women who also face high-pressure tasks. Perhaps the solidarity of women who face perceived glass cliff enables them to value the status of their well-being better, especially how immersed or engaged they are at work. In addition, the impact of the meaningfulness of the challenging jobs that women face contributes to how positively they perceive their work. Lastly, we are able to confirm the link between glass cliff, job satisfaction, and turnover intention in the context of Filipino leaders during the COVID-19 pandemic. While no mediation effects were present across the model, this study affirms the direct and significant relationship between perceived glass cliff and turnover intention and between job satisfaction and turnover intention separately. These links are in agreement with other scholars who have studied the connection between barriers to women's leadership and turnover intent. In the literature review, factors resulting in turnover intention involve tokenism, specifically regarding the unequal standards women face compared to men, and lack of empowerment. This is aligned with the mechanisms of the glass cliff discussed earlier, including the lack of career advancement and networking opportunities as compared to men. Burnout from high-pressure tasks has also been mentioned as a contributing factor to turnover intent in the interviews. Support in career growth, such as assistance in career development, is found as a job satisfaction determinant as well. Along with this is the emphasis of respondents on the importance of empowerment through respect and appreciation of efforts, proper compensation, and DEI initiatives. All these help in improving women's satisfaction, which would discourage them from leaving their current workplace.
Now, let us discuss new ways of understanding the glass cliff phenomenon. While Ryan and Haslam, the ones who coined the term, claim that glass cliff is not a natural phenomenon, women leaders from our study challenge their statement. For them, the glass cliff is universal and it is inevitable and inescapable. Their mindset stems from, of course, the still widely prevalent gender biases, but it could also be the result of child rearing. Gendered beliefs instilled during children's formative years could lead to discriminatory beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors in adulthood, which are reinforced by gender-biased educational practices, media, and a patriarchal Filipino society. Another probable reason why women believe glass cliff to be universal is female in-group bias, where women themselves place fellow women in precarious situations and high-risk roles. The rise of egalitarian essentialism could also be a contributing factor to the perceived universality of glass cliff. Believing that men and women are innately and fundamentally different in skills and interests could make gender inequalities seem inevitable and resign women to accept the unfairness of the glass cliff. From our respondents, we deduce that there may be more than just individual factors contributing to the glass cliff. Organizational size can be one of those factors, as larger companies are likely to appoint women leaders when 1. There is a greater number of employees, and 2. There is poor economic performance, as opposed to MSMEs preferring male leaders in times of crisis. Larger companies also have more resources to do DEI initiatives. Another organizational factor is the industry or function that the women leaders belong to. While the participants cited the creatives industry and the sales and marketing functions as predominantly male, literature also claims STEM professions, agriculture, academia, and finance as male-led industries and functions that pose as a challenge to women leaders. There is contrasting evidence, however, indicating that stereotypically male industries like mining and oil, what are expected to have male-dominated leadership, actually have more female leaders on their corporate boards. Social support also plays a significant role in the glass cliff experiences of Filipino women leaders. Our data shows an inverse relationship between management levels and social support, meaning the higher the position of female leaders in a company, the lower their desire is for senior leadership support. Moreover, a direct positive relationship was found between social support and turnover intent, meaning the greater the social support, the greater the turnover intention of women leaders. This means that women leaders prefer minimal support from their immediate supervisors despite literature claiming the importance of it in mitigating glass cliff consequences. Unique and new ideas were also obtained from the data, but still require further studies. These include first, age and tenure, playing a role in worsening glass cliff situations. Second, individual differences such as personality traits, skills, interests, and previous experiences influencing how glass cliff is perceived by women leaders. And third, glass cliff not being a significant contributor to the turnover intent of women leaders unless they experience glass cliff in extreme or repetitive circumstances.
We now wrap up the findings of this research with a few summative insights. This study was carried out to better understand how the glass cliff phenomenon impacted the turnover intentions of women leaders in the context of a novel crisis, specifically the COVID-19 pandemic. The proposed mediators, well-being, specifically the engagement in social support pathways of Seligman's PERMA theory of well-being and job satisfaction were found to have no effect on the relationship of the glass cliff to turnover intention. Nevertheless, it was validated that the perceived glass cliff directly affects turnover intention among women leaders. Each respondent notably had a unique take on the studied phenomenon in terms of the impact of the generational gap, prior experiences in high-pressure environments, and lastly, the prevalence of DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within the company. The contradicting finding regarding the impact of social support on women leaders was further understood. Limited senior leadership support makes women leaders feel more trusted, empowered, and fully capable of fulfilling their roles. Finally, we also claim the universality of the glass cliff due to prevailing gender and in-group biases, and show that the glass cliff could not only be explained in terms of individual factors, but also through organizational and industrial antecedents. In line with this, we present some recommendations for further exploration. Given that the current study utilized only a limited number of survey participants and were also restricted by certain time constraints, it is suggested that further research with a larger sampling size be conducted to see more significant relationships between the glass cliff and other variables. Emergent potential mediators could also be explored, such as age, tenure, and gender stereotypes in functions and industries, for example, the predominance of men in finance and IT. Another point of interest worth investigating is the role of organizational culture, particularly its variance depending on location, size, management, and how it creates an environment that may be enabling a glass cliff. The inclusion of participants from other token statuses such as those from the LGBTQA+ community or other racial outliers would also be beneficial. In fact, a similar concept, coined as the lavender ceiling, is a growing body of study with regards to difficulties faced by LGBTQ employees when it comes to the corporate ladder. Lastly, there's also a well of potential insights from unapproached key informants, particularly those who have already breached the glass cliff successfully and already hold executive positions. With all that being said, we conclude this presentation with a call to action to end the glass cliff in organizational settings and shift the burden away from women leaders. When we start becoming aware of subtle gender bias and act on it early, only then can we achieve our desired goals of social inclusion and gender equality.